Before and throughout the Second World War, the Nazis and the Third Reich opened a huge network of concentration camps in which they employed many sadistic SS guards and members of staff. These men and women were tasked with inflicting such suffering onto the prisoners of the camps, and a number after the end of the war were sentenced to death and executed for their crimes. But there were a huge number who were never brought to trial. Many of these were murderers and complicit in the mass killings. There was one concentration camp found inside of the Fichtel mountain region of Bavaria, in which 30,000 people were killed inside of. Flossenburg Concentration Camp's numbers swelled to a huge amount during the conflict, but despite the hundreds if not thousands of staff working there, only a small number were executed for their crimes which took place at the notorious camp. Join us today as we look at the justified executions of the guards of Flossenburg, and remember to support our channel. Please make sure to subscribe. As the Nazis increased their stranglehold over Germany, the SS and the Gestapo began to round up huge numbers of those deemed undesirable by the state. The plan was to use these prisoners in slave labour, and the intention was to use them to quarry granite, which was used in high demand in huge building projects across Germany. On the 24th of March 1938, a site near the small town of Flossenburg was chosen for the creation of a concentration camp because of its location close to a granite quarry. It was a rather remote site and was not close to a rail junction or a huge city, and Flossenburg was a rather poor rural area, which had 12,000 people living there, with most people working in the local quarries. Initially the plans were to build 8 barracks, and in April 1938 the SS guards arrived, and the following month 100 prisoners from Dachau arrived. More prisoners joined the camp, and Himmler visited to see how things were going. The new prisoners had to create the camp themselves, and they started making the barbed wire fences, and the work was very heavy and dangerous, with prisoners firstly living in makeshift barracks. At the same time as the camp was being made, many were being sent to the quarries, and as the barracks were completed, guard towers, sewer systems, and other infrastructure was being created. The prisoners, who were dressed in Polish uniforms during the false flag operation to justify the German invasion of Poland, came from Flossenburg, as they died from the conditions there. By September 1939, more prisoners were arriving at Flossenburg, and the numbers of the camp increased, with a huge number of foreign prisoners being kept there. Initially, mostly those who were resistant to the Nazis were housed there, but following the outbreak of the Second World War, a large number of Polish prisoners of war and Soviet prisoners arrived. Many would spend many months recovering at Flossenburg, as the conditions they were held in at other camps were very bad, and they were not fit enough to work. But over the years the camp would expand to a huge site of slave labour, with dozens of thousands of people being sent there. Working there were many guards, including 500 SS women, who were part of a guard force, and as it went on there were many more sub-camps established. There were 4 quarries that were found close to the main camp at Flossenburg, and there were a huge number of accidents which resulted in many prisoner deaths. The work inside of the quarries was dangerous and hard, but there were some prisoners who were trained as specialist stonemasons. Much of the stone cut was used in projects such as the creation of the Autobahn, and Flossenburg became one of the most prosperous concentration camps. But as time went on, the quarries were shut down, and the focus became armaments, and specifically creation of aircraft parts. Prisoners were used to create parts for the Messerschmitt Bf 109s, and they would then make different parts inside here. In terms of the conditions at Flossenburg, the quarries caused a high death rate. Prisoners suffered with a severe lack of water and rather cold and wet weather due to the location of the camp, and the clothing they were given was not adequate, with many suffering from hypothermia. Also it became overcrowded, and the barracks became full, and the prisoners were forced to sleep and work in shifts to maintain productivity, and disease also ran rampant. The undernourished prisoners caught many deadly diseases, such as dysentery, which at times even forced the camp to shut down, and typhus also ran rampant, killing thousands in September 1944 and January 1945. Around 30,000 prisoners died there, and many also died inside of the sub-camps. Guards would force prisoners to work very hard, but in the final months things broke down. The large number of transports caused conditions to get much worse, and the death rate increased hugely. There was not enough space inside of the infirmary. Because of this, all of the sick prisoners were sent to Bergen-Belsen, and a police force was established made up of ethnic German prisoners who mistreated and beat other prisoners badly. Himmler would order the evacuation of the concentration camps, and it was said that not a single prisoner must fall into enemy hands, and as soon as this was received, the plans were made to evacuate Flossenburg. Many prisoners were loaded onto trains, and one of these was even strafed by American aircraft, which killed many, but thousands more were force-marched to camps such as Dachau. These marches were horrific, and at many of the sub-camps, the SS would massacre Jewish prisoners before evacuating. The death marches of Flossenburg cost the lives of around 7,000 prisoners. However, as the war was coming to an end, the focus shifted on placing those who worked at Flossenburg on trial. The US Army appointed 11 investigators, and many members of staff who worked there were arrested, and 51 defendants were indicted at the Flossenburg trial. The defendants were tried before a US military court at Dachau between the 12th of June 1946 and the 22nd of January 1947, and all pleaded not guilty. 33 of them were lower-ranking members of the SS, 16 were former prisoners who were given roles such as Kapos, and 2 were civilians. At trial, a huge number of witnesses came forward to testify about what happened at Flossenburg, and how many guards would kill and brutalise prisoners without a care, and would give them little food, and they also said how poor the treatment was there. Most of the defendants were accused of neglecting, mistreating, and killing prisoners there, and also on the death marches, and most of the accused were members of the SS or the Waffen-SS, along with the prisoner functionaries. On the 22nd of January 1947, the judges announced the sentences, and 15 death sentences were given out to those who worked at Flossenburg. Later, 3 of these sentences were reduced to life imprisonment, but those executed were Konrad Blomberg, the head of the political department, Christian Mohr, a high-ranking guard, Ludwig Schwarz, the head of the Herbruck subcamp, the head of a guard company, Albert Roller, the head of the Legenfeld subcamp, Erhard Wolf, a block leader and head of the camp's prison, Josef Furst, who worked in a security outside of the camp at the quarries, the command leader of 2 other subcamps, Josef Hauser, Christian Eisbusch, and Wiloszewski, and August Jinsel, who were all Kapos. All of the condemned were then transferred to Landsberg Prison to await their executions. They were kept here for a number of months, and at this time Landsberg and the gallows were kept very busy, with hundreds of Nazi war criminals being executed on the structure there. On the 3rd of October 1947, the majority of men found guilty for their crimes at Flossenburg were executed. They were all brought from their cells after each other, and were flanked by many American guards and members of staff. They were then led up to the gallows accompanied by a priest, who remained with them until they were handed over to the executioner. The executioner then made his preparations, and the hands and arms were checked that they were secured, before a black hood was placed over the heads of the men. After this, a noose was placed, and then quickly the lever was pulled, releasing the trap door, and the men plunged to their deaths. They were then quickly placed in a coffin after death had been confirmed by a doctor. Despite around 30,000 prisoners dying inside of the barbed wire fences of Flossenburg, very few guards and members of staff actually faced justice at the end of the war. Most of the guards managed to evade capture and would never face a judge or up to their crimes. There were scores of female guards also brought to the camp, but none of these really ever faced a trial or the hangman's noose. What is for certain, though, is that the conditions at Flossenburg were horrific and brutal, and the work the prisoners were forced to do was backbreaking, dangerous, and very hard. Today, many of the crimes of Flossenburg Concentration Camp remain untold. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.